A farmer's quiet words mock a judge's arrogance, but when he reveals a century-old secret, everything changes. Stay tuned to witness a battle for justice that no one saw coming. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The small courthouse in Mill County looked exactly how one would expect a rural courthouse to appear. Old brick walls, wooden benches that creaked with every shift, and ceiling fans that buzzed louder than the conversations in the room. It wasn't the type of place you would expect to make national headlines. In fact, most of the people who passed through its doors were involved in small-town issues, land disputes, water rights, and fence lines. There was nothing flashy about it. The stakes were often low and the cases didn't make for much drama. But on this particular Wednesday morning, everything would change. At the center of the courtroom stood Jack Ferguson, a 61-year-old soybean and cattle farmer from Mill County, Missouri. His weathered face and worn clothes told the story of a lifetime spent working the land. He wore a sun-faded flannel shirt, his boots still covered in dirt from the fields, and a quiet but firm resolve in his eyes. For Jack, this was not just any day in court. This was a fight for his family's land, a piece of earth that had been in his family for 4 generations. The county, backed by a private solar energy developer, was attempting to seize his $120 acres of land using eminent domain. They had offered Jack a generous check for the land, but he refused. He wasn't interested in money. He was defending his father's land, the land that had sustained his family for decades, the land that had been passed down from one generation to the next. Jack wasn't a lawyer, but he wasn't going to let anyone take what was his without a fight. So, there he stood, alone, representing himself in a battle against a powerful corporation. Sitting at the bench was Judge Clara Montgomery, a woman known for her sharp wit, no-nonsense attitude, and Ivy League education. She wore a crisp suit and had a reputation for being tough on all the cases that came before her, especially those involving rural drama, which she often found beneath her. Judge Montgomery was used to dealing with legal jargon and polished arguments. She wasn't used to hearing people speak from the heart. When Jack began his statement, it was clear that he wasn't a polished speaker. His voice was thick with a Midwestern accent, slow and deliberate, as if each word carried the weight of his years of hard work on the land. "Your Honor," Jack began, his voice steady but not without a certain heaviness. "I don't speak in lawyer talk, but I know what's right. This land fed 3 generations of babies, and it ain't for sale to no panel of judges." Judge Montgomery raised a hand, clearly unimpressed. She smirked and turned towards the court stenographer, signaling that she had heard enough. The courtroom was silent, waiting for her next words. And then, without warning, she let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "My goodness," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I can't decide if I'm presiding over a case or judging the county fair pig calling contest." The sound of her laughter bounced off the walls and the room froze. The bailiff looked stunned. A reporter in the back of the room nearly dropped his pen, and Jack just stood there, his face unreadable. The moment hung in the air, heavy with the weight of Judge Montgomery's dismissive tone. The rest of the courtroom was still, waiting for Jack to respond. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply picked up a single sheet of paper from his folder, walked slowly up to the podium, and laid it down in front of Judge Montgomery. His actions were deliberate, calm and measured, but the energy in the room shifted. Everyone could feel it. "Your Honor," Jack said, his voice as steady as ever. "Before you go on laughing at my voice, you might want to read what your great-granddaddy wrote in 1931. The room went quiet. The judge's smirk faltered and she blinked in surprise. She stared at the piece of paper, clearly confused. "What did you just say?" she asked, her tone more defensive now than before. Jack didn't raise his voice. He simply repeated, "Read it." Judge Montgomery hesitated for a moment. She was clearly rattled, but with a sigh she slipped on her reading glasses and picked up the piece of paper. It wasn't typed. It wasn't formatted like a legal document. It was a handwritten letter, sealed inside a protective sleeve, with the Missouri state emblem stamped in the corner. The letter was old, its edges worn from age, but its message was clear. Jack stepped back, watching quietly as Judge Montgomery read aloud, her voice growing softer as she realized the weight of the words she was about to read. October 12, 1931. To the citizens of Mill County, if one day the laws of men threaten the soil beneath your feet and the roof above your kin, may this letter remind you that no title, no office, and no courtroom shall ever outrank the voice of a free landowner. Judge Montgomery's face turned pale as she finished reading. Her grandfather, Thaddeus Montgomery, had once presided over this very same courtroom during a time of great turmoil in the country. Thaddeus Montgomery had been revered for standing up against federal pressure when farmers were being forced off their land during the Great Depression. He had written this letter as a reminder to future generations that landowners had a right to protect their property, no matter the cost. And now, nearly a century later, his own descendant had laughed at a man speaking with the same conviction he had once honored. Jack's voice broke the silence once again. My granddaddy helped him write that letter, he said quietly. He was his court clerk, that's his handwriting too. The courtroom was still. No one spoke. The weight of Jack's words hung in the air, heavier than any legal argument could ever be. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted and the tension was palpable. Judge Montgomery, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly, slowly set the letter back down on the bench. It wasn't just the words she had read that left her in shock. It was the realization that Jack's words were no accident. This wasn't just some farmer making a desperate plea. Jack was more than just a man defending his land. He was a man standing in the shadow of a legacy that no one could ignore. The room, which had been filled with murmurs just moments before, was now eerily quiet. Even the sound of the buzzing ceiling fan seemed distant, as though the room had become trapped in a heavy silence, weighed down by the history that had just been unearthed. The other people in the gallery, some local residents, some reporters, and even a few curious bystanders, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Many of them knew the importance of the land in Mill County, but they hadn't realized just how deeply rooted that connection ran, how it tied into something greater than the immediate dispute. Jack stood there unmoving, his eyes fixed on the judge. He had said what needed to be said, and now there was no going back. He wasn't here for pity or sympathy. He was here to defend what was his, what had been passed down from his ancestors, and he wasn't going to let anyone, not even someone as powerful as Judge Montgomery, take that away from him. Judge Montgomery, still reeling from the impact of Jack's words, struggled to regain her composure. She opened her mouth to speak, but faltered. This was not how she had imagined this day going. This wasn't some simple case involving a land dispute. This was bigger. It was about respect, dignity, and the very foundation of what it meant to be a landowner, to fight for something that had been in one's family for generations. In the back of the courtroom, Paul Donovan, a local reporter for the Mill County Gazette, couldn't help but notice the shift in the energy. As a journalist, he had covered many local cases before, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a legal matter. It was a story that would resonate with people beyond Mill County. He took out his pen, ready to write, knowing that this moment would change everything. The tension was too thick to ignore, and he could already feel the story unfolding in front of him. Judge Montgomery, still not speaking, glanced at the letter, once more, her eyes lingering on the signature at the bottom. Thaddeus Montgomery, it read. The name seemed to carry a weight of its own, as though it was a legacy that couldn't be ignored, no matter how much she wanted to dismiss it. Thaddeus Montgomery had been a figure of great respect in this county, revered for his role in standing against the pressures of the federal government when farmers were losing their land during the Great Depression. He had written that letter not just as a legal document, but as a statement of defiance, a plea for future generations to protect what was rightfully theirs. Jack, sensing that the judge was struggling, took a step forward. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shout or demand anything. He just spoke calmly, his words carrying the weight of someone who had lived through hard times, who had worked the land for most of his life. You see, Judge Montgomery, Jack said, This land, this farm, it's not just dirt under my feet. It's history. My history. My father's history, my grandfather's, my great-grandfather's. We've worked this land since 1923, and no one's taking it away from us now. Not even if they have money and power on their side. Judge Montgomery glanced at the letter again, and for the first time in the entire hearing, her face softened. She looked down at her desk, unable to meet Jack's eyes. This wasn't a typical courtroom moment. This wasn't a case of property, rights, zoning, or land use. This was something more personal. Jack wasn't just fighting for land, he was fighting for his family's legacy, for the honor and respect that had been passed down through generations. It was a fight for dignity, for everything his ancestors had worked for and for the future he hoped to give his children. Your grandfather, he was a judge here, wasn't he? Judge Montgomery finally spoke, her voice almost a whisper. Jack nodded. Yes, he was. And his words still stand, just like mine do. I'm not asking for sympathy or charity, Judge. I'm asking for what's right. This land is mine. It always has been, and it always will be. The courtroom, which had been so tense before, was now filled with an odd kind of stillness. The air seemed to hang heavy, as if everyone in the room understood the magnitude of the moment. Jack wasn't just some rural farmer who had been pushed into a corner. He was a man who had every right to stand up for what was his. He wasn't here to be ridiculed or dismissed. He was here to make sure that his family's legacy wasn't erased by the interest of a powerful corporation. Jack's words hung in the air long after he had spoken them. Judge Montgomery didn't respond right away. She sat back in her chair looking at the letter and then back at Jack. For the first time in the entire hearing, she wasn't looking down on him. She wasn't mocking him. She was listening. Really listening. The defense attorney, a slick lawyer from the solar energy company, was the next to speak, his voice cutting through the silence. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. We're here to discuss land seizure, not some old letter, he said, trying to regain control of the courtroom. But the gallery wasn't having it. A retired Vietnam veteran stood up in the back of the room, his voice steady and clear. No, sir, he said, looking directly at the attorney. This is about respect. It's about a man who's standing up for his family, and you've got no right to take that from him. The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. People were no longer passive observers. They were invested in Jack's fight. They understood that this wasn't just about land, it was about justice, dignity, and the right to stand up for what's yours. The defense attorney fell silent, not knowing how to respond to the growing support for Jack's cause. Jack, however, remained quiet. He wasn't there for a fight. He wasn't there for the spotlight. He just wanted his family's land, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. He had said what needed to be said. Now it was up to the judge to decide. The tension in the room was thick, but there was no turning back. This wasn't just about a courtroom battle anymore, it was about something much bigger. And Jack Ferguson was ready for whatever came next. The following days felt like an eternity for Jack Ferguson. He was back at his farm, working the land as he always had. But there was a constant hum of unease in the air. He didn't need to watch the news. He didn't need to check his phone because the entire town seemed to be talking about the courtroom moment that had shaken Mill County to its core. His quiet stand had turned into a symbol, something much bigger than the land dispute itself. Judge Clara Montgomery hadn't returned to the bench since that fateful day. The courthouse was unusually quiet, and there was a sense of anticipation hanging in the air, as if the entire town was waiting for something to happen. Even the local newspaper, the Mill County Herald, ran a front-page story with the headline reading, "Judge laughs at farmer's accent. His words spark national backlash." The story included a grainy video of the moment the judge had laughed at Jack, followed by his calm, measured response. By that afternoon, the video was everywhere. It was posted on social media platforms, news websites, and forums. Within hours, the video had gone viral, accumulating millions of views. People from all walks of life, from farmers to office workers, were sharing the clip, expressing their shock and support for Jack's dignity. The hashtag #TharsIStandWithJack began trending, and it wasn't long before the video made its way to national news outlets. In the midst of this, Jack remained unfazed. He had never been one to seek attention. He was used to working in silence, letting his actions speak for themselves. But now, every time he turned on the radio or walked through the local diner, he could hear people talking about him. They weren't talking about the court case, they were talking about his dignity, his courage, and the way he stood up to a powerful system that had tried to dismiss him. It wasn't just local farmers who were supporting Jack. The viral video had ignited a nationwide conversation about respect, classism, and the treatment of rural Americans. A retired Army veteran named Frank Davis posted a video on social media saying, "Jack Ferguson is not just defending his land. He's defending all of us who've been looked down on just because we don't speak like they do in the city." That video alone had been shared over 1 million times by the end of the week. But the backlash against Judge Montgomery was just as swift and intense. By the time Jack's video had hit the 10 million views mark, petitions started to circulate, calling for her removal from the case. One petition reached over 200,000 signatures within 24 hours. There were stories of people in cities far from Mill County showing their support. In Nebraska, a woman in muddy boots stood in front of her farm's gate and filmed a video saying, "I don't care how a man talks. If he's standing up for what's right, you shut up and listen." The video received thousands of likes, and the movement continued to grow. Despite the viral support, Jack didn't pay much attention to the digital world. His world was the farm, the cattle, the crops, and the quiet moments spent with his wife Mary in the evening after a long day's work. He wasn't interested in fame or becoming some kind of rural hero. He just wanted to ensure that his family's legacy remained intact, that the land his ancestors had worked for generations wouldn't be taken by a corporation simply because they had the financial power to do so. Meanwhile, Judge Montgomery's reputation was deteriorating faster than anyone could have predicted. The criticism she faced was not just from the public, but from legal experts and media personalities alike. A late-night talk show host made a joke about the incident, saying, "Imagine mocking a man defending his land while sitting in a chair his great-grandfather built. You can't make this up." The audience roared with laughter, but there was a certain bitterness behind it. People were not laughing at Jack's accent anymore. They were laughing at Judge Montgomery's arrogance. Back in Mill County, the energy was different. The local diner where Jack had his morning coffee every day had become a hub for discussion. The usual quiet hum of conversation was now replaced with passionate debates about the court case. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, and even people who had never met Jack were talking about the injustice they felt had been done to him. One afternoon, as Jack sat at the counter, a young woman approached him. She worked at the local high school and had been following the story online. "Mr. Ferguson," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say, what you did was incredible. You stood up for what's right and you showed us all what real strength looks like." Jack nodded, offering a small smile. "I didn't do it for anyone else. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and my family's land. It's not just mine, it belongs to everyone who's worked it." The young woman smiled back, clearly moved by his words. She was part of the younger generation, a group that in many ways had grown disconnected from the rural values Jack represented. Yet, in his quiet dignity, she saw something that resonated deeply within her. It wasn't just about land or farming. It was about standing up to those who believed they could take what wasn't theirs and treating people as if their voices didn't matter. Jack's words spread far beyond the small town of Mill County. Within a week, major news outlets had picked up the story, with commentators dissecting the implications of the case for rural America. Legal analysts weighed in, questioning Judge Montgomery's behavior and whether her actions constituted bias. And slowly, the story became less about Jack Ferguson, the farmer, and more about the message his actions had sent to the world. Meanwhile, Jack never watched any of the media coverage. He never read the news articles, never scrolled through the endless social media posts. He was too busy working. One evening, as he fixed a broken fence on his property, his wife Mary approached him with a warm cup of coffee. "They're talking about you on TV," she said quietly. "People all over the country are saying how proud they are of what you did." Jack took the cup from her, smiling softly. "I didn't ask for any of this, Mary. I just didn't want to be laughed at in my own county." Mary placed a hand on his shoulder, looking at him with pride. "You weren't laughed at, Jack, you were heard." As the viral movement continued to grow, people in rural America began to feel a renewed sense of pride. Jack Ferguson's stand had sparked a conversation about classism, respect, and the treatment of rural communities. It wasn't just a courtroom moment. It was a moment that reminded people that sometimes standing up for what's right means speaking your truth, no matter who laughs at you or who tries to silence your voice. And Jack Ferguson, despite the chaos swirling around him, remained focused on what mattered most: his land, his family, and the quiet dignity that came with standing tall in the face of injustice. The week following the courtroom incident was a whirlwind. Jack Ferguson's name had become synonymous with dignity, resilience, and standing up for what's right. His story had reached far beyond the small boundaries of Mill County, capturing the attention of communities across the nation. He was now the face of a movement, one that represented rural values, the importance of land, and the simple, unshakable truth that respect wasn't something that could be earned or bought. It was a right, one that should never be denied, no matter the circumstances. But while the public rallied behind Jack, the situation in the courtroom was far from over. Judge Clara Montgomery had been forced to step away from the case after an intense public outcry. The video of her laughing at Jack had taken on a life of its own, and the backlash was swift and unforgiving. Judge Montgomery had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the legal system, with the elitism and bias that many felt plagued the courts. It was clear that this case was no longer just about Jack's land. It was about much larger issues, including judicial conduct and respect for rural communities. As Jack continued his daily routine on the farm, quietly working the fields and caring for his animals, the pressure continued to mount on the courthouse. The local phone lines were ringing off the hook, with people demanding justice, calling for accountability, and insisting that the system be held responsible. Petitions had circulated across the state, calling for Judge Montgomery's recusal, while legal experts debated the implications of her behavior on the future of rural property rights. Amid the storm of public opinion, one thing was certain: Jack Ferguson wasn't going to back down. He didn't need the media. He didn't need the limelight. What mattered to him was keeping the land that had been in his family for generations and ensuring that no one would ever disrespect him or anyone like him again. The case had been reassigned to a visiting judge, one with a reputation for fairness and integrity. Judge Ethan Green, a quiet, thoughtful man from Kansas City, had been brought in to oversee the proceedings. Unlike Judge Montgomery, Judge Green didn't have any preconceived notions about rural America or its people. He understood the importance of due process and the need to uphold the law without bias. His presence was a welcome change in the courtroom, and Jack, though still wary of the legal system, felt a sense of relief that someone with a fair mind was now in charge. As the date for the new hearing approached, the courtroom began to fill with anticipation once again. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. The tension that had once been thick in the air had started to dissipate. People weren't just showing up for Jack. They were showing up for something bigger. They were showing up for justice. They were showing up because they believed that standing up for what's right was worth fighting for, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable the fight might be. On the morning of the hearing, a crowd had gathered outside the courthouse. Farmers in overalls, business owners in suits, teachers, and families from across the region had arrived, not just to support Jack, but to stand up for something more, a principle, a belief in the dignity of hard-working people who had been too often overlooked. The media presence was overwhelming, with cameras flashing and reporters trying to get a glimpse of Jack as he entered the courthouse. But Jack didn't let the attention faze him. He simply walked through the doors, his head held high, his eyes focused on what lay ahead. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. Judge Green entered the room with a quiet dignity, his demeanor calm but resolute. His robe fluttered slightly as he took his seat, and for the first time in weeks, the room felt as though justice might actually prevail. The court was full, the gallery buzzing with whispers as everyone waited for the proceedings to begin. Faith Lawson, the attorney who had stepped in to represent Jack pro bono, stood beside him at the plaintiff's table. She had been a quiet force throughout this process, guiding Jack through the complexities of the case while ensuring that his voice remained at the forefront. She had gathered the evidence, filed motions, and prepared for this moment. Her calm demeanor in the face of such public scrutiny spoke volumes about her commitment to the cause. She was here to ensure that Jack's dignity and his family's land would be protected. When the proceedings began, Faith rose to her feet, her voice steady and strong as she addressed Judge Green. "Your Honor," she began, "we are here today not just to defend the rights of my client, Mr. Ferguson, but to stand against the systematic disrespect that has been shown to rural landowners like him. This case, which was originally about eminent domain, has turned into something much larger. It is about fairness, it is about dignity, it is about ensuring that people are not mocked or belittled because of where they come from or how they speak." The defense attorney who had represented the solar company attempted to interrupt, but Faith was undeterred. "I have here," she continued, "a video that was taken from the courtroom on the day of the original hearing. In it, you can see the judge laughing at Mr. Ferguson's accent. That laugh wasn't just a moment of levity. It was a moment of disrespect. It was a moment that highlighted a fundamental misunderstanding of who people like Jack Ferguson are." Faith paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in before she continued. "And I have here," she said, holding up a large file, "a letter that was written by Mr. Ferguson's great-grandfather in 1931. A letter that speaks directly to this issue of property rights and the rights of free landowners in this county. This letter was written by a judge, a man who stood up against the pressures of a federal government trying to take the land of local farmers. It's clear that Mr. Ferguson is not just defending his land, he's defending a legacy." Judge Green, who had been listening intently, nodded and gestured for Faith to continue. He had heard enough. It was clear that Jack's case wasn't about a simple land dispute. It was about a man standing up for his family's legacy, for his community, and for the very principles of justice and dignity. The defense attorney hesitated. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was nothing more to be said. His attempt to argue that the case should be dismissed based on the technicalities of legal procedure fell flat. It was clear that Jack's right to his land was indisputable. The judge's ruling when it came was swift. "Based on the evidence presented," Judge Green said, his voice calm but firm, "I declare that Mr. Ferguson's land is rightfully his. The actions taken by the solar company and the county were unlawful. I hereby dismiss all claims related to this land and order that the property be returned to Mr. Ferguson." The courtroom erupted into applause, though the sound was muffled by the overwhelming sense of relief that filled the room. Jack didn't smile. He didn't need to. He wasn't there for the applause. He had fought for his land, for his family, and for the principle that no one should ever be made to feel small or insignificant. Outside the courthouse, a new wooden sign had been hammered into place near the road, just a few yards from where Jack's farm began. It didn't say private property or no trespassing. It simply read, "4 generations fed from this ground. We're not moving." Jack didn't pose for photos, didn't stand in front of the sign for a moment of glory. He simply went back to work, tipping his hat to the passing cars as he went to feed the cattle and fix the broken fence. His legacy wasn't in the headlines or the viral videos. It was in the land he worked, the family he supported, and the quiet dignity that would continue to carry him forward. As for the nation, it wouldn't forget Jack Ferguson anytime soon. His story had become a symbol of resistance, a reminder that standing up for what's right, no matter how big the fight, was always worth it. And as the years passed, Jack's name would continue to live on, not in a courtroom, but in the hearts of the people who believed in dignity, respect, and the power of standing tall.